Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the WFSN CC Implementation Plan Template Review webinar. I just want to take the first few minutes to go over how to use GoToWebinar technology. In particular, I'm going to show you some features that allow us to make the presentation more interactive. You should see a control panel pictured on your screen right now. If you don't, it's because you've minimized it, and you can pull it back out by going to the Grab tab, pictured as Figure B on the slide, which hides and shows the control panel. There's also an attendee list, which is Figure A, where you can see all of the participants on the call. If you have a question, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on the control panel, and you can unmute your line so you can talk to us. Another way you can participate is through the question pane, which is Figure D on the slide. You can type your question in the question pane, and you can read it to the group or respond privately. All the panes can be expanded or minimized by clicking on the plus or minus button that are at the top of each pane. In the past, we have experienced some audio troubles. So if for some reason you're having difficulty being heard, you will want to make sure that you're not muted on your personal phone and that you have entered the audio pin provided to you at the beginning of the call. If that does not work, you can always try hanging up and calling back to see if, so that you can enter the audio pin again. And I will also note that sometimes there's a delay in the slide, so if at any point I've already started talking about another slide, it just means that sometimes your computer is slightly delayed. I want to take a moment to just introduce the Achieving the Dream staff on the call. I'm pictured to the right. My name is Elissa Shomek. I'm an Assistant Director of Programs. Also with me on the webinar is Julian Haynes. He's the Associate Director of Programs working on this initiative. Prior to joining the webinar, each college should have received an email from me yesterday that included a reminder to join this webinar and links to 3 specific documents. These documents include the WFSN CC Implementation Plan Template, the Communications Plan Template and Guidelines, and the Budget Template. I strongly urge you to download and save the documents prior to viewing them. I particularly noticed that the formatting on the implementation plan looks off if you viewed it online. If you're having any challenges viewing or downloading the documents, please email me after the webinar and we can send you the links again. I'm going to briefly run through the agenda for the webinar. As I mentioned in the webinar invitation, a significant portion of this call will be dedicated to reviewing the implementation plan template and the appendices. We will also have a dedicated time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that may arise during the presentation. Specifically, I'm going to run through the implementation plan, walking you through each of the 3 goals of the initiative, exactly how the implementation plan is organized, and then finally discussing project management, which is section 4 of the implementation plan template. Then I will briefly walk through the appendices, which include the communications plan template and the budget template. Next, then after that, we will provide a few updates and then open the line for question and answer period. So right now I'm going to get started with reviewing the implementation plan and specifically the summary and expectations of the plan. This can be found on page 3 of the implementation plan template. You can read through the summary and expectations, but I'm going to provide a high-level overview. Specifically, this plan is meant to be a guiding tool and action plan for the implementation of WFSN CC strategy on your campus. As we have reiterated throughout this process, you will want to start this work with scale in mind. This plan should emphasize the goals of transforming both the college's culture and operations. The plan should also reflect a commitment to data-driven decision-making and the value and commitment to equity. And I also just want to remind you that at any point, you should feel free to contact ATD if you have questions about the plan or need further clarification on any of the information that's included in there. So starting with Goal 1, which is Section 1, which starts on page 6. Goal 1 is implementing WFSN CC services to serve increasingly large numbers of students. Goal 1 expectations are outlined on pages 6 through 8. I will go through these expectations in more detail later on in the webinar as they relate to specific questions in the implementation plan template. These have also been reiterated during the inaugural forum and to a much larger extent during the logic model workshops in your state, which were led by the early implementation evaluation team, which is Derek Price and his team, which includes Brandon Roberts. If you have continued questions about these expectations or need further clarification, we can address them at the end of the call. So starting with identifying your target population, which is done on page 9. For the purpose of this grant, the identified target population is low-income students. We have defined this as Pell eligible. If you do not already have ready access to Pell eligible data, we'd urge you to use Pell recipient data. If there is an additional population your institution intends to target, or if your state has a more specific definition for low income, we encourage you to write about that on page 9 in question 1A. We will ask you to identify who that target population is, provide a definition, and demonstrate an ability to collect data on this population. This data includes the total number of students in that population, demographic information, and any other data that would strongly support your reasoning for targeting this population. I'm going to now ask that you move to page 10 if you're following along with the implementation plan template. If you're starting with a smaller subset of students or with a smaller subset of services, you will need to do the following. Identify the initial target population and the milestones for that population. Identify the number of students in that population and also the percentage relative to the larger low-income population. And specifically, if you intend to launch with limited services, we'll need you to explain a time frame for expanding services. Moving on to page 11 through 24. This is section 1B, the 3 core service areas, specifically the proposed services your institution will implement. As we have mentioned during the logic model workshop, each institution is expected to offer 6 services. That would be 2 services in each of the core service areas, as you can see in the graphic depiction on the slide. That is education and employment, work and income, and then financial literacy and asset building. Each institution is expected to offer 1 low and 1 high-touch service in each of the 3 pillars. Each institution can choose to offer more services. We just ask that you add additional space in your template to provide all of our required questions. The required services include financial coaching and the integration of financial literacy and benefits access information in a student success course or other like course that touches a large number of students. Again, this is just a repeat of what you learned during the logic model workshop. This exact slide was showed to you during that workshop, in fact. So just to take a moment to get into exactly what we need you to provide for each of your proposed services. We're looking for you to provide the name of the service, and I've pre-populated the plan with your required services. You don't need to fill that in, but we do ask you to provide a detailed description of what the service is, who will receive the service, where possible, including relevant data on this population, which would include the number of students to receive this service and relevant student demographics. We also ask you to identify the name and title of the prospective staff lead. We ask that you identify what core service area this particular service follows into, the service status, so whether it's an active service on your campus, it's going to be expanded, or it is a brand new service. We also ask that you provide the academic semester/quarter and the year in which the intervention began or is planned to begin. Please also include if the service is mandatory or voluntary. So perhaps you have mandatory orientation, then your financial literacy and benefits access information that's provided during an orientation would fall under mandatory. But perhaps you have an optional orientation, then you would pick optional. You can also think of it as, are students required to opt out or they are required to opt in? And then finally, we ask that you provide the level of service. So is it a high-touch service or is it a low-touch? And if you've been thinking about them as low, medium, and high-touch, we'd be happy to talk with you more offline on whether that service should fall into low or high-touch. I also want to take a moment to talk a little bit about one specific question we asked in terms of financial coaching. We have outlined 3 specific financial coaching programs on page 13. That includes Central New Mexico Community College's Workforce Training Center program that offers financial coaching, career coaching, and advanced coaching. There's Neighborhood Works and also Tribe Coaching. ATD is going to be specifically working to develop training opportunities through CNM, but in this particular question, we ask that you detail whatever financial coaching service training your institution prefers to use. So if you prefer to utilize CNM coach training, we ask that you outline it there. We just wanted to be respectful of the fact that there are existing institutions that are already providing financial coaching and might have a different preference. So now we are going to jump to page 25. Section 1C. This is a strategy for bundling or integrating services. So just to provide a clarification, bundling is the intentional selection and integration of services that help a student achieve explicit short and long-term goals set by a student on a timeline that effectively moves them through a pathway to college success. So simply the virtue of receiving 2 services that fall in 2 or more of the core service areas without the intentionality behind it would not qualify it as bundling. We really want the institutions to think about what are the natural combinations that might lead to bundling. So perhaps, you know, financial literacy and financial coaching would be a very natural way to bundle services for students. And there might be existing ones that you've already thought of since attending your logic model meeting. We ask that you describe the institution's strategy for integrating the identified 6 or more services and how they will be bundled or sequenced. We also ask that you identify the administrative home for WFSNCC, both the accountability and reporting home. We ask that you also provide us a little bit of detail as to why that location is being considered. And then finally, we ask you to draw a flow chart or charts outlining how students will receive bundled services. On page 27, I've provided you a few resources to give you examples of what these flow charts might look like. I have one example on the next slide. This particular flow chart comes from Northampton Community College. They were a benefits access for college completion institution. We reference that initiative quite often. This specific flow chart shows the counseling and advising process, but what I will say is that it depicts the flow for one service. So I would urge you to look at the option A and option B that I've provided through LIST. That will show you what it looks like for a client flow, both client flow for multiple services. And so those are hyperlinks there, and you'll want to look at the legend as well. So as you think about drawing your flow chart, you'll want to think about what are the entry points for students and where do students receive services. You might remember from the inaugural forum, Thomas Major from the Lumina Foundation talked about what are the watering holes for students. So keep that in mind as you think about drawing your flow chart. And also, that'll be very helpful as you think about developing your communications plan and how you can most effectively reach your students. So next we're going to move to page 28. This is partnerships. So as you think about, what services you're going to deliver, think about new or existing partnerships you can leverage to support this effort. And don't think that your institution has to do everything and be everything to your students. You can leverage very effective partnerships to help serve your students. So as you're thinking through these partnerships, new or existing, like I said, you want to think about MOU or grant agreements. Do you have them? If you don't have them, how will you secure them? And in both cases, you'll want to think about, do you have access and ownership of your data? And do you have the ability to share that data with a third-party evaluator? That'll be very important for the initiative moving forward, as we want to make sure that we have easy access to data to make sure that we can share lessons learned, and future institutions can learn from the work that you all are doing. And then finally, just identifying who is going to manage this relationship or who already manages this relationship. Okay. Section 1E on page 28 still, you'll want to identify the challenges or concerns particularly relevant to Goal 1. Also outlining the college's approach to overcoming these challenges and what particular technical assistance needs your staff or faculty might benefit from relevant to this goal. And then on page 29, this is the work plan. If you've had the opportunity to flip through the implementation plan, you'll see that both the challenges and the work plan repeat themselves, but I do want to draw the distinction is that we're asking these relevant to Goal 1, and then later on Goal 2, and then further on Goal 3. So on this slide, I've outlined just a very brief example of what a part of a work plan for Goal 1 would look like. So one measurable yearly indicator would be increasing the number of students receiving WFSN CC services and 2 to 3 core services by X annually. Obviously, you fill in what X is. And so you think about what your action steps are to achieve that yearly indicator and to implement the services that your institution has proposed to provide. So one action step might be incorporating financial literacy into a student success course. Again, these are fairly broad, but I just wanted to provide you a brief example. You might want to be more granular with your work plans. I think the more granular you are, it's work up front, but it will really benefit you in the long run. That concludes Section 1, Goal 1. Now we're going to move on to Section 2, Goal 2. Goal 2 is collecting and reporting data to strengthen the evidence base and provide a database for evaluation. The data expectations are found on page 30. I'll briefly run over them at a high level. So we're expecting each institution to be able to link student unit record data with specific data from the WFSN CC initiative. So that'll be data relevant to service receipt, length or duration of service receipt from a student, did they receive a low or high touch service, etc. You'll want to be able to collect either student ID numbers through intake forms, or perhaps you have scan card technology. It'll look different depending on your institution, how your institution plans this work moving forward. You also want to work towards accessing UI data and benefits access data if your college doesn't already have access to this information. And we'll get into these details a little bit more later on in the webinar. So now you want to move to page 31. I'm going to specifically talk about Section 2A and 2B, which is collecting and reporting data. So we first ask that you identify the existing student information system that your institution uses. If your institution is transitioning to a new data system soon, please also include that. You'll want to outline a process for collecting the type of WFSN CC services received. So that'll be, like I said, the level of intensity, duration or dosage of service, etc. We'll want a brief description of the existing MOUs and data sharing agreements. So for use of your time, you might consider copying and pasting that information from the previous section. We also ask that you detail the key staff you think will be involved in this process, so the IR and IT staff, and also the staff you anticipate being trained to collect, enter, and monitor data. And then section 2B asks you to describe the process for combining program data with student unit record data. Again, I just want to emphasize the MOU and data sharing agreements. As I said, there will be a phase 2 evaluation for this work. In order for the evaluation to be successful, the evaluators need access to all data relevant to WFSN CC. So if you've entered into or are currently in the process of entering into a partnership with an external entity, it is really critically important that your institution has access to and ability to share data. If you have any questions relevant to this, we can talk about it more once we get to the Q&A section, or you can follow up with me or Julian after the webinar, and we'd be happy to set up a time to talk with you on the phone. So benefits access and unemployment insurance data. I really encourage your consortium to work together collaboratively on this process, and this will be a great area where your state partner can really help you through thinking about how you'll access and utilize this data. So again, work as a consortium, evaluate what data access you have currently, develop a plan, so include timeline, goals, and clear staff responsibilities. You want to work on relationship building with the state entities that house this data. You might even consider contacting, any partners and learning from their experience in accessing this data if by chance they do have access to it. And then finally, working towards developing MOUs and data sharing agreements. So internal and external resources. You'll want to think about, particularly relevant to Goal 2, what existing staff capacity do you have? Do you have staff capacity to take on this extra data work? You might want to consider, leveraging district staff or seeing how your state partner can support you. Or, some institutions might consider adding an additional staff person to work on WFSN CC on their campus. Thinking about what data systems you have currently, what data systems might be out there that can support this work, and any other relevant resources that could include partnerships you'll want to outline in section 2D. And so again, back to the challenges question that repeats throughout the implementation plan template. What challenges or concerns does your institution have relevant to Goal 2? Based off of the logic model meetings, you might have significant concerns and challenges depending on the ability to alter your data system or your data system's capacity to really work well with WFSN CC data. How is your college going to approach overcoming these challenges and really outlining what kind of technical assistance needs your institution has. So again, the work plan. You want to show progression of the expansion and movement to scale, noting milestones and yearly indicators, and then clearly designating specific staff. And I'm sorry, I should have gone over that in more detail when we were talking about Goal 1. But you can read the description in 2F, and again, that description repeats itself throughout the implementation plan. The implementation plan is organized in a way that it kind of will seamlessly blend with your logic model. So I think if it wasn't clear before the importance of the logic model, it really aligns well with the implementation plan and should make this process a lot easier for you. So again, an example of a measurable yearly indicator could be X percentage of staff trained to collect WFSN CC data, Your institution might start with conducting an analysis of your student information system and its ability to collect and merge with WFSN-CC relevant data. So that's the end of Goal 2. I do see that there have been a couple of questions, and I'm not ignoring you. I will get to them at the end of the webinar. So moving on to Goal 3, catalyzing culture change across campuses by embedding WFSN-CC services into systems and structures of the college. So the Goal 3 expectations are outlined a little bit differently than the other two sections we just went over. They're outlined on page 35 and 36, and that particularly covers the leadership engagement and culture change and operational change piece. And then page 40 and 41 outlines the focus and commitment to equity and particular attention to racial equity. So I'll go into more detail of that, but I'm going to start with talking a little bit about leadership expectations and culture change. So you'll see on page 35, we have a great definition of culture change and an example of culture change relevant to CNM, and that has been pulled from MDC's case studies on the colleges they worked with, the original CWS colleges, if that rings a bell. And that resource can be found on APU's website under all of the WFSN-CC resources, which you all have access to. And I'm happy to send again after this webinar. So page 37, section 3A, asking about leadership. So we're looking for you to identify the senior leadership that is responsible for assuring that WFSN-CC is seen as an institution-wide approach and not a discrete project. I know that this has been really drilled in, but again, I just wanted to touch on it to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're being very clear about what the expectations are of this initiative. We're looking for you to identify how leaders will be directly involved in planning and oversight, while also taking steps towards institutionalization. So institutional policy changes, so policy and process change. So I provided some examples. You want to think through policy and systems change that need to occur to support the implementation of your services and the subsequent scale. So perhaps your institution is planning on integrating benefits access data into your orientation. And you want to, that'll be perhaps your low-touch service. You might consider changing your optional orientation to mandatory. So that would be your policy change. A process change example could be, changing your advising process to incorporate screening and referral for WFSN-CC services. Again, that's a little bit broad. You might want to make that more specific, but just a broad example to provide you kind of the information we're looking for that question. Page 39, strategic planning, accreditation, and budgetary processes. So starting with strategic planning and accreditation, we're looking to find out what is the current status at your institution. Did these processes recently take place? Are they coming up? Perhaps they're underway right now. So thinking about how WFSN-CC strategy can be infused into these processes. And in terms of the budget, thinking about opportunities to integrate WFSN-CC into your budget and including a timeline for that integration. So perhaps your institution intends on using some of your grant funding to pay for a staff person, thinking about when you're going to transition to the institution covering that, that staff person's entire salary. So that would be one example. Okay. So page 40 to 41 covers the equity agenda and equity expectations. So equity obviously is a value of this initiative. As you'll remember, we evaluated your applications based on a commitment to equity. So I just want to take a moment to explain the graphic you can see on the slide here. All of the figures would represent your entire low-income student population. So if you're thinking about the scale expectations and that you're supposed to serve 25% of low-income students with low-touch services, that would represent the orange figures on screen. So if we're thinking about equity, sorry, my slide was slightly delayed. If you're thinking about equity, then we would expect to see 25% of those students that you're serving be students of color. So obviously, I recognize that you can't serve half of the students, but it's just to be, correct with my math, that you would serve 4.5, or in this case, we would expect 5 students to be served. On page 41, we specifically ask that you identify how cultural sensitivity and equity will be intentionally integrated into your implementation plan. Specifically, how cultural sensitivity will be infused into training that emphasizes equity within regards to race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, and gender. And I also just want to point to page 40. We've outlined some examples of data metrics collected relevant to equity. So I encourage you to very carefully read through these 2 pages. The example of equity provided on page 41 is actually transcribed from a video from Achieving the Dreams Kickoff Institute. The link has been provided in the implementation plan, but if you'd like to listen to it yourself, you can click there, or I will be sharing the PowerPoint slides after this call. So communications and marketing, which is on page 42, we ask that you consider how WFSN-CC implementation progress will be communicated to your internal and external stakeholders. You'll want to complete the attached communications plan template that was included in my email as I referenced before. This is the same communications plan template that I reviewed during the inaugural forum. As a refresher, I'm going to plan to distribute the video that was recorded from that session, and that'll be included in the email follow-up to this webinar. And finally, the challenges for Goal 3. So challenges or concerns the institution has relevant to Goal 3, including equity, culture change, and leadership engagement. So thinking about the ways the college will overcome these challenges and any technical support that your institution will need. And then on page 43, again, the work plan repeated throughout this document. One example I've provided for the measurable yearly indicator, at least 75% of faculty and staff will be able to communicate with students and the community about WFSN-CC services. So a possible work plan action step would be having the president incorporate WFSN-CC initiative into your convocation, hosting professional development days relevant to WFSN-CC, and having your WFSN-CC team attend other college department meetings and informing and engaging them in the implementation process. That concludes section 3 of the implementation plan. Now we're going to move on to section 4, which is the project management part of the implementation plan. So the first section, we're looking to learn a little bit more about the team at your campus that will be working on this initiative. So we're asking you to provide and describe an organizational chart. Again, this is an example from the WFSN implementation guide that's found online. There are a lot of really great examples in there, and if you haven't already looked at it, I really encourage you to take a look and see what inspiration you might get from those examples. This is an org chart from CNM. It shows how CNM Connect is integrated into the institution. We also want you to provide a project management plan for meetings. So we would like to know the frequency of meetings that your team will have, who's going to participate, and how you intend to report out to your leadership. And then just more logistically, we're looking for the staff contact information so that we can assure that, you know, for webinars like this nature, everyone is getting that information. And then finally, at the end of the implementation plan, we just ask you to provide any additional information you would like to convey to us that hasn't been covered in the other 45 pages of the document, and then a checklist to help you remember all the documents we're expecting from you. And then very briefly, if you were able to open the budget document, it looks very similar to the budget you submitted during the proposal period. So we don't really anticipate any questions. I know you probably can't see the budget all that well because it's fairly small on your screen. But if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those during the Q&A portion. And now we're going to move on to some updates.
Great. Thank you, Elissa, for that great overview of the implementation plan and orientation regarding how to move forward on this important work. Again, my name is Julian Haynes. I'm an Associate Director of Programs here at Achieving the Dream. I'm helping to lead the expansion of the WFSN in Community College Initiative. And one thing I just want to kind of emphasize is to not necessarily overthink the implementation plan. There's a lot of great information in there, and hopefully some good tools to help you fill out the implementation plan. But you've already done a lot of great work on your logic models. I've seen firsthand, having participated in at least 2 logic model workshops, that you really are beginning to get down the activities that you need to complete to achieve the 3 primary goals that are included in the logic model and also in the initiative. So this implementation plan template directly aligns with the logic model template by design, so that you don't have to kind of rethink and recreate what your next steps will be. So I would use your logic model as a kind of a framework, as a tool that it's designed to be to help flesh out some of the activities in real time as you see them on your campuses of implementing the WFSN initiative. Some brief updates. So I just want to briefly talk about the timeline for the submission of the first draft of implementation plan template by the WFSN colleges. Is going to be November 14th. This will be for all of the colleges. We originally had a staggered timeline based on the logic model workshops because they all happened at different dates, but we thought it'd be easier to have them all due at the same time on November 14th. And we'll be sending out a revised timeline to all of the colleges indicating these dates again, what will be happening in between and immediately following the submission of that first draft. The implementation evaluation team between November 14th and December 15th, Achieving the Dream will collaborate with the implementation evaluation team to review and provide substantive feedback to the implementation plans to the colleges. You can expect to receive that feedback. We hope before December 25th, so you can have it before the holidays to review with the deadline of a final submission of the implementation plans in mid-January. So it's just kind of a brief update with regard to the key dates with the submission of the draft plans and then ultimately the submission of the final plans. Final in quotes here because we know that these are living documents that will be tweaked as needed moving forward as you begin implementing the work that you can keep going back to and refining over time. So the next update is we have today we have finalized the grant agreement. We are in the mail merge process, and we'll be sending that out. We hope by end of day today to the key contacts that have been provided by all the WFSN colleges, and including the president of each college. We know that different personnel at colleges have signing authority on the grant agreements, but we will be we'll be sending it to the key contacts and including it to the president. Again, we hope by today, but the good news is that we have it finalized, and we will be sending it out as soon as possible. The second update is we have a webinar calendar that we are in the process of pinning down dates to help all of the colleges think through various components of the WFSN implementation. And as we finalize those dates, like the webinar today, they will be recorded, and you can go back to them online and listen to them if you're not able to attend. But pretty much every week between, at least every other week between now and November, we have webinars scheduled that will focus on such topics as culture change and leadership, financial products, mapping, kind of going in more in depth on the student flows document that Elissa has included in the implementation plan template, financial literacy, equity and two-generational approaches, fundraising, and benefits access, and a few additional webinar topics that we've identified to support the colleges as they work on their implementation plan. So we'll be sending out that webinar calendar to you shortly once we pin down the dates and presenters. The last couple of things include the financial products component. As many, if not all of you are aware, MetLife Foundation has made a special grant to Achieving the Dream to advance the work of the colleges focused on using different financial products and services to support their WFSN efforts and to help students become more financially stable by managing their money better through financial education and coaching. And so kind of a first step with regard to this process is ATD will be hosting a webinar on Tuesday, September 23rd from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to begin introducing some of these products that we've started developing in collaboration with two of our key partners on this work. So again, we'll be sending out webinar registration information for that call next Tuesday, but it is scheduled for Tuesday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it will also be recorded. And lastly, second to last, there is a survey that ATD will be sending out immediately after this call that focuses on financial products, trying just to get a sense of what financial products, if any, the WFSN colleges are currently using. The goal of the survey is to gather high-level demographic information on how students at your respective colleges are utilizing different forms of funding. And we'll use this data to help design additional services and products to support WFSN students moving forward. So please expect from ATD this survey immediately following this webinar that we ask that you please complete by close of business next Monday. It's a relatively short survey, and it will really help us think through about this financial products component of the work moving forward. And lastly, there's a newer tool that was produced with support from Lumina Foundation. It's called the Student Financial Stability Self-Assessment Instrument and Interpretation Advisor. We would like to share this resource with the colleges as it may be helpful in helping you develop your implementation plan. The Lumina Foundation, which is also one of the WFSN funders, commissioned an assessment tool for colleges trying to improve their operations and services for low-income families. The basis of the assessment tool came from the WFSN framework, although it was designed for a broad audience of colleges instead of specifically for colleges in this network. At ATD and the WFSN funders think it might be of use to WFSN colleges. So as I mentioned, we'll be sending this out to you after the call. There's a near final draft, just to clarify. It's not a final draft, it's a near final draft. And we will also be providing some technical assistance resources as we plan to schedule an optional webinar with the developers of the assessment tool to help walk through it and answer questions. While we will be hosting a webinar specific to this tool that I mentioned that Lumina recently developed, that recently supported, using the tool and the TA to help is totally optional. It's intended as a resource that might be helpful. If you do use the tool, the Lumina Foundation would be interested in your feedback at a later date on its usefulness and ease of use. So again, two emails that will be immediately following this webinar will include a link to the survey that we would ask with regard to financial products, the demographic student data that you have access to, regarding the habits of your students and how they receive financial support, and this tool that I just mentioned that was supported by the Lumina Foundation. So that is it with regard to updates, but I imagine a lot may come out also during the question and answers. So why don't we start with whoever came in first.
So if you have any questions now, you can either feel free to type them into the question pane, or as I said before, raise your hand and we can unmute your line so that you can talk freely to us on the phone. One question is more of a technical question that came up is a few people did not receive the documents that I'm referring to. So I intend to follow up with those people, particularly to let them know who from their institution received those documents. But for the key contacts, we just ask that you forward the documents to your team just as a follow-up to make sure that everyone is getting them. We have learned from some people that our emails are going into their spam box. So we ask that you add the WFSN at Achieving the Dream to your contact list, and that will prevent it from going to your spam box. But I will intend on following up with each institution to give them a list of the contacts that we have so that you can amend that list or add to that list. So thank you. If the documents were not attached to the email you received, they were hyperlinked, so you needed to click on them. I can follow up with you particularly to send them to you because I can see who's asking the questions, but I don't think everyone on the call needs to know. The next question we received is, what are the specific unemployment and public access data elements that you will be looking for us to collect?
That's a great question with regard to unemployment and public benefits access data. We know that every college, depending on what state you're in, you have access to a statewide system that you can refer students to access, either to both identify whether or not they're eligible for state public benefits and also receive those public benefits. We are in the process of finalizing what the Phase 2 evaluation will look like, and it will include specifically with regard to public benefits access, what if there are particular data points, and I'm not saying that there are, that we will want the colleges to collect with regard to public benefits access, as well as with unemployment insurance. We know that unemployment insurance can be a more challenging data point to collect, depending on getting access to that data, specifically disaggregated data on UI, can be very challenging. So we will provide more information specifically about what we'd be requesting, but we will be reasonable on what is possible within each state. Just some examples with regard to public benefits access: it could be earned income, could be child care subsidies, could be receiving SNAP benefits. So you may already have a long list of benefits, public benefits that you know your students currently access. We probably won't get down to the specific details, but we want X percentage of your students to be receiving SNAP benefits. It will be more of a general body of data that we hope you will collect with regard to access to public benefits. So with regard to Scribe, this is something that I introduced during the Washington Logic Model Workshop and the Virginia Logic Model Workshop. We are currently in the process of kind of vetting Scribe as a prospective tool for the colleges to use. For those colleges where in states where Scribe was not discussed, just kind of very briefly during the Logic Model Workshops, Scribe is a universal. It's a software that is a universal platform that's it's easily customizable help what we've heard from the colleges connect the data received, the WFSN-specific data to be linked with student unit record data. And so we know that one of the challenges is working with existing systems, say with, this one example may be PeopleSoft, is an inability to successfully upload new data into PeopleSoft. So an inability to upload WFSN-specific data into an existing screen or an existing area of PeopleSoft where WFSN data and student unit record data could be collected. So Scribe is kind of an online customizable platform that could help be that go-between to the extent that you can export student unit record data from PeopleSoft into a separate system, that could be customized. So we are currently presenting Scribe as a potential option for colleges to use to serve that purpose, to take very specific information, or as specific as needed, from your existing student information system, exporting that information to a tool like Scribe that can have WFSN-specific data included in it, and you can produce universal reports and have kind of data sets that you can see the students, both who receive, XYZ bundled services, high and low touch services, and what kind of their other demographic student information, academic information, as it was exported from PeopleSoft or DataTel or Banner. So we know that this point of data collection and combining the WFSN data with student unit record data has been kind of a challenging, potentially challenging issue with regard to this work moving ahead. So we're trying to find out internally and working with our funders to what extent we can work with Scribe and with the colleges on implementing it for WFSN. So all I can say beyond that is we hope to learn shortly to what extent Scribe would be a viable overlay system for this work moving forward.
Are there any additional questions? We don't have any coming in, and I don't see any hands raised. I guess we'll add, so I've followed up privately with the people who have emailed in questions saying that they want to know either who from their college received the documents or letting me know that they did not receive the documents. If you did not let me know this by the question pane, please email me. You'll see my email up there. It's e.showbeck@achievingthedream.org, and I can send them to you.
And as other questions come up, as you begin reading through your implementation plan templates, Elissa and I will always be a resource for you that you can engage directly. But just to kind of give you the overall technical assistance structure, what we're thinking about for each state, and what we've already put into place with most of the states, is having a dedicated coach working with the colleges. We're still kind of finalizing exactly the makeup of the combination of subject matter experts and coaches to work within each state to help provide both proactive and kind of reactive technical assistance support as you navigate implementation plans and begin taking some of your theory and planning into practice moving forward. But we recognize that between now and the end of the year and just a few weeks beyond, we'll be really focused on giving you as much information as you need through webinars, through direct TA with the coaches and subject matter experts, through Achieving the Dream also, to develop as robust a implementation plan as possible, so you know exactly where you're going to begin, and the leadership and management will be responsible for moving the work forward. We really, really appreciate your patience with us as we finalize the grant agreement. This is a learning experience for all of us, and so we hope that once we work out some of these kinks initially, we'll be moving forward in a manner that allows everyone to have all the resources they need to move forward effectively. So again, we really appreciate your patience and all the work that you've done prior to even receiving the grant agreement, which again I mentioned we certainly hope to have out today. Certainly we set our plan to have it out today. So we really appreciate your time today, and as we go through it, please go through the implementation plan. Please follow up with impromptu questions. and we will continue to move forward on the technical assistance timelines that we originally set forth, with a few modifications that we'll be sending out regarding the entire timeline, as I mentioned earlier during an update. Lisa, do you have any other final thoughts?
Well, I do have a couple of questions that have come in. So one question was, how are we supposed to document the required match in the budget?
So that's a great question. We are planning to, we will be developing a template that I imagine the question is for reporting match versus indicating the match in the proposal, in the implementation plan proposal budget. So ATD will be developing a, more than likely, a very simple document that can be used where you can indicate the level of match funding, how you've collected the match funding, how you've defined the match funding in this first term. And that will be submitted with your financial report, with your narrative, and with your final implementation plan towards in mid-January. So, as one of the webinars will be focused, I mentioned earlier, on fundraising, during which we will review that template that will be used by all the colleges to indicate the progress made toward in their fundraising goals.
Any more questions? We've had a couple of questions about match funding. So match funding question mark, or is match funding a requirement? And also, will reallocated funding from the state budget still count as match?
The first question, the match funding, raising additional funds for this initiative is a requirement. As indicated in the original RFP, although we did not go into specific detail. It is included in the grant agreement, and we've been having one-on-one conversations with the presidents of each college, going into a bit more detail about what the fundraising requirements are. This is one of the reasons why there's a bit of delay in getting the grant agreement out the door, in that we are finalizing what we're defining as match. And to the second question regarding reallocated state funding to meet the match requirement, yes, to the extent the grant agreements are for 1 year, and then we'll be signing additional 2- and 3-year grants. They are 1-year renewable grants. So when I say the first term, I mean this term. That we would like the colleges to raise a combination of both reallocated and new funding from external entities, be it the state, be it private philanthropy, be it federal grants, but also begin thinking about how institutional funds can be repurposed to support WFSN. So, for example, in California, with the state equity grants, college equity grants that are being given to all of the colleges, the case can certainly be made that funding, to the extent that it is fungible, which I believe it is pretty fungible, can be used to help meet the fundraising requirements of the WFSN initiative. That is a good example of state funding that can be repurposed to support WFSN. In years 2 and 3, we would like the colleges to work increasingly toward there being a more even balance between reallocated institutional funds and new funding. So, not to put a number on it, but say 50% of the funds to support the work moving forward come from reallocated institutional funds, and this does not mean in-kind support, but actually moving resources from one line item to another line item, financial resources, and also raising half of that amount, which is roughly $50,000 per college from external funds. Now, just to go back to the first question with regard to it being a requirement, we are not considering it to be a college-by-college requirement. It is a consortium requirement. So it is $200,000 per consortium, which breaks out to $50,000 per college per year. And so and we're not asking for, and you'll see this in the grant agreement, we're only asking that the commitments for the fundraising component be in hand by the end of year 1 and available to support WFSN in year 2. And so you will, again, there's a specific section on this in the grant agreement that speaks about the fundraising requirement and the acceptable uses of what we mean by reallocated institutional funds and new external funds.
So this will be our last call for questions.
If there are more specific questions with regard to the fundraising component, please contact me directly by phone or email. I'd be happy to talk with you more about it moving forward.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I just want to reiterate that this is being recorded and we will distribute it to your college team. I intend on following up with each institution, letting you know who is on your list of contacts that we have access to, asking you to confirm if you want them to remain on this contact list and if you have additional people to add. And just for due diligence, I will send each institution all 3 attachments. So you should look for that later today, as it does take a little bit of time to upload the webinar to our YouTube channel. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And please feel free to follow up with us. Our emails are both on the slide that you can see, and you can always feel free to email WFSN@AchievingTheDream. Julian and I both share that email and check it regularly. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.